As always, I'd like to begin this morning with a prayer. And this is a prayer for America to the Holy Spirit. Come, Holy Spirit, we ask you to grant us the power of the Holy Spirit so that we may listen to your guidance and walk in your love. We are concerned for those innocent people being hurt by mass deportation, for the many lives being lost in Gaza, for the people in Ukraine who are losing America's support, for our disassociation from NATO and the countries who rely on the United States for support. Guide us in our work to peacefully return, to be in the America who says, give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Come, Holy Spirit, speak through each of us today. Give us the depth to truly listen to your guidance spoken through each of us, and give us courage to lead the way for us to carry out your will. Help us to be the kind of Christians who compassionately stand up for the poor and marginalized, and courageously are willing to take action against injustice. All this we ask in Jesus' name. Amen. And we're going to begin this morning with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, a legislator and a woman of faith who addressed Congress about how often she hears scripture being misused to support bigotry. So, oops.
I am experiencing this hearing and I'm struggling whether I respond or launch into this question as a legislator or from the perspective of a woman of faith, because I cannot, it's very difficult to sit here and listen to arguments in the long history of this country of using scripture and weaponizing and abusing scripture to justify bigotry. White supremacists have done it. Those who justified slavery did it. Those who fought against integration did it. And we're seeing it today. And sometimes, especially in this body, I feel as though if Christ himself walked through these doors and said what he said thousands of years ago, that we should love our neighbor and our enemy, that we should welcome the stranger, fight for the least of us, that it is easier for a rich man, it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to get into a kingdom of heaven, he would be maligned as a radical and rejected from these doors. And I know, and it is part of my faith, that all people are holy and all people are sacred, unconditionally. And that is what makes faith sometimes, that's what prompts us to transform, because it is unconditional. It's not about that it is up to us to love parts of people. We love all people. There is nothing holy about rejecting medical care of people, no matter who they are on the grounds of what their identity is. There is nothing holy about turning someone away from a hospital. There's nothing holy about rejecting a child from a family. There's nothing holy about writing discrimination into the law. And I am tired of communities of faith being weaponized and being mischaracterized because the only time religious freedom is invoked is in the name of bigotry and discrimination. I'm tired of it. My faith commands me to treat Mr. Minton as holy because he is sacred, because his life is sacred, because you are not to be denied anything that I am entitled to, that we are equal in the eyes of the law, and we are equal in my faith in the eyes of the world. And so I just have to get that out ahead of time, because it is deeply disturbing. Not just what is happening here, but what this administration is advancing is the idea that religion and faith is about exclusion. It is not up to us. It is not up to us to deny medical care. It is up to us to feed the hungry, to clothe the poor, to protect children, and to love all people as ourselves.
Oh, brave one.
This morning, I would like to introduce the three guests who will be in conversation this morning. Jon Rosebank is a fellow of the Royal Historical Society. He was formerly a fellow of New College, Oxford, and an executive producer at the BBC, making history documents. He now writes both academic works and a podcast, History Cafe, bringing the latest historical research to a wider audience. So, Jon, we're happy to have you this morning. You'll be in conversation with Hildegard Letbetter. Hildegard was born in 1939 in Germany and migrated to the United States to start college. And sitting beside her is Marie Wilwerding. Thank you, Wilwerding Venner, from a German family who immigrated to the United States and long been an active church reformer. So I welcome all three of you this morning, and now I turn it over to you, Jon.
Thank you very much, Rini. It's very, very good of you to invite us to be here. Thank you so much. I'm going to try and share screen now. Let me try and share screen. Which one of these do you think it was? That one. That one. With any luck, you have. That's very good. Here we go. So you asked me to give a very brief sketch of Hitler's rise to power and what he did when he got there, with the thought that there might be parallels within contemporary America. So I'm just going to go very briefly through the 1920s and 30s, and Marie is going to give just some initial thoughts about the kind of parallels that you might find in the USA now. Just to start with, however, a note of caution. It's always tempting to look at history and think that there are parallels in history, but we've always got to be very careful about it because things are never quite what they seem. Let's take a topical example. Let's think of one. What about tariffs? I think today is the day in which Mr. Trump has tried to introduce a lot of tariffs around the world. And he quotes as his example William McKinley, who was a member of Congress back in the 1890s and introduced the very famous McKinley tariffs. Well, Trump says, okay, the 1890s were a period of prosperity. McKinley introduced tariffs, therefore tariffs lead to prosperity. Problem is that when you get closer to it, it's nothing of the sort. The McKinley tariffs were in fact intended not to boost the American economy, but in some ways to slow it down. And in fact, they were very successful. By 1892, there had been a very steep rise in prices. The Republicans were wiped out in the elections of that year. And by 1893, America was deep in recession. So Mr. Trump has picked the wrong example. Later in his life, President McKinley became president, as we know. And you see him there. There he is on the 3rd of September, 1901, giving a speech at Buffalo in New York. And he's very clear. He says, basically, summarizing a long speech, he basically says, tariffs are a dumb thing to do. He says, what America needs is a policy of goodwill and friendly trade relations. Commercial wars are unprofitable. So by trying to choose a kind of facile historical parallel, Trump has got himself proving exactly the opposite of what he wants to prove. I suppose we should also add that the next day McKinley was shot and died a few days later. So maybe he's not a good example for Mr. Trump to choose. Anyway, let's go back to the 1930s and just see whether there are any, whether it sparks any thoughts for today. The first thing to be learned about Adolf Hitler was that he was an outsider. He was, of course, not a normal politician. He was, of course, actually Austrian. He wasn't a German citizen until shortly before he became chancellor. He lived in Vienna before the First World War, trying to make his living as an artist. There's an example of his work. I think you can see why he never succeeded in making a living as an artist. And when the First World War broke out, he made his way to Germany and joined the German army. I'm getting a little bit of feedback from someone. Somebody must have their mic open. In 1924, Hitler attempts to launch a coup. His intention was, in fact, to try and march from Munich to Berlin. He got as far as getting from the beer hall in Munich to the town square, and at that point, the whole thing fell apart. It was a complete disaster. But it had two very important consequences. One was that the judge at his trial allowed Hitler to make very long speeches explaining his ideas. And Hitler became, therefore, in a minor kind of way, a celebrity. He became a kind of press celebrity because these things got reported throughout Germany. The second thing was that after allowing him to speak, the judge sentenced him to prison. And there he is in the Landsberg prison, rather comfortable, as you can see, with his nice tablecloth and his flowers, sitting in his lederhosen with his friends. And he used his very comfortable prison time to write Mein Kampf, his large book on his ideas. He used his friends to write much of it as well. The thing about Mein Kampf is not that it's readable, but that it made him very rich. In fact, by the time he was chancellor, he'd earned about the equivalent of about $6 million from it, which he managed to evade paying tax on. The point, however, is that Hitler was an outsider and not a normal politician at all. He was a rather rich celebrity who could play at politics. He could pose as a kind of fresh face, not the tired old usual politician. In fact, he wasn't even a member of the Reichstag, the German parliament, until just before, in fact, after he became chancellor. So how did this rather unlikely figure come to power? Well, it's a very good question. First, he preached beliefs that were very popular at the time. He ranted about them at enormous length. There he is in 1925. You can see him giving his speech. He spoke in a southern German Austrian accent, in a succession of wild half-truths and exaggerations, which established politicians and respectable people in Germany found rather ridiculous. But enough of the public found him to be believable for him to be effective. You could, I suppose, if you were looking for a way to sum up what Hitler was saying, he was saying, let's make Germany great again. What he was saying, in effect, was what many people were saying, that at the end of the First World War, left-wing politicians had let Germany down. None of this was true. Had let Germany down, had signed a shameful peace, and had then, which had lost a lot of German land and had meant to say they'd lost all their armed forces. And they then allowed the German economy to become weaker and weaker. Hitler said, I will turn all of that around. Well, of course, it was all much more complicated than that, but voters don't do complicated. What he was saying was believable enough so that many people would start to vote for them, and they began to. His party began to gain more and more votes, and of course, the regular politicians had no answer to this. The people also rather enjoyed watching Hitler's brown-shirted thugs with their flags marching past, because that too reminded them of the days before the First World War when Germany had been great. So long as they didn't come and beat you up, it made you feel that Germany might be great again. Maybe you're beginning to recognize a pattern here. But none of this would bring Hitler to power. What happened in the end was that Hitler was made chancellor by failed right-wing politicians who thought they could use him as a puppet. The financial crashes of 1929, the Wall Street crash and so on, had sent the German economy into a tailspin, 6 million unemployed. The democratically elected politicians had no answer at all. The aged president, Paul Hindenburg, you can see him there in his military uniform and his pickle Gruber hat. He never believed in democracy. And he began using what we might call executive orders, using an Article 48 of the Constitution, which allowed him to do whatever he liked without parliamentary approval. So he appointed a succession of men, his friends and others, who he thought might stand in as chancellor, might be able to solve the severe economic problem. None of them did. In the end, one of them, Fritz von Papen, who you can see in the bottom picture, just sitting on the right-hand side of the picture there, Fritz von Papen persuaded Hindenburg. Why didn't they try this outsider celebrity guy, Hitler? He was losing votes at that time. His party was getting smaller. But why don't we try him? He's got a lot of popular support. Why don't we bring him in to prop the government up? He's such an outsider. He's so eccentric. He's so experienced. Surely we can easily, he's so inexperienced, surely we can easily control him. So Hindenburg tried the experiment. He appointed Hitler as chancellor, only 2 other Nazis in the whole cabinet. What could possibly go wrong? Perhaps I might pause there for a moment to see whether Marie has any responses immediately so far to Hitler's rise to power.
Sure. Yes, thanks so much, John. It's so reminiscent because Trump, too, it came onto the political scene as a minor celebrity, kind of trumpeting his wealth and independence and of the political establishment. And Trump has also been a vehicle for others on the right. A number of other entities and institutes, the Federalist Society, the Heritage Foundation with Project 2025. And we're beginning to see how something potentially similar is playing out in the United States.
Fantastic. Thank you, Marie. Okay, so once Hitler comes to power, what he does immediately is he just upends the political system. He's not going to be used as a puppet by absolutely anybody at all. He immediately calls for new elections, but what he does is he immediately begins to intimidate his political opponents, try to stop them from voting, kind of thing that, of course, a democratic politician would never try to do. He persuaded Hindenburg to issue a stream of executive orders allowing the police to break up or ban political meetings. And then in February 1933, the Reichstag, the German parliament building, burnt down. Who was responsible has never been established. But of course, Hitler blamed his political enemies. He had 25,000 of them interned in newly constructed concentration camps. And now he began issuing decrees, suspending the freedom of speech, press and assembly, introducing capital punishment for a long list of crimes. And his SS and his SA began intimidating voters. Now, despite all this immoral, if not strictly speaking, technically illegal action, the Nazis didn't win a majority. And Hitler's in the elections of March 1933. And his response was to line the temporary parliament chamber. You can see them there all going in. This is the Kroll Opera House, which they use as a temporary parliament. Line the temporary parliament with his SS and his SA, and to force through what was called the Enabling Act. His thugs prevented all 81 communists and 26 of the 120 social democrats from taking their seats, detaining them in so-called protective detention, which meant the Dachau concentration camp. As a result, the members of the Reichstag voted 444 to 94 to allow Hitler to issue any new laws he wanted without Reichstag approval. They basically voted themselves out of existence. 73 Catholic Centre Party delegates voted in favour of Hitler's Enabling Act. I don't really want to talk about the Catholic Church now. We'll talk about it later on, but maybe we can just note that for the time being. What Hitler now went on to do was to gut government. The Nazis closed down many government institutions and set up new Nazi ones in their place, sort of bringing them all together. There was a German word they used. Our German friends will have to forgive my pronunciation, but it's called Gleichschaltung, coordination, bringing things into line. closing down what exists and setting up new streamlined administrative bodies that you can organize. As you will imagine, political opponents and also Jewish people were just kicked out of the civil service. Trades unions were closed down. Other political parties were just simply banned. All the other state legislatures, and Germany has a constitution rather like the United States with separate states. All of those legislatures were closed down. They began to control arts and media. In September 33, the Reich Culture Chamber was set up to control all arts and media. From December 33, a new press agency controlled all the newspapers, many of them closed. Only 4 major film companies were allowed to continue. There you have Hitler broadcasting on the very first day of his chancellorship, looking rather nervous in front of the microphone. Well, by 1934, all radio stations had been closed down and coordinated into just one. And in fact, the Nazis commissioned the making of a new radio that could only receive Nazi radio, the Volksempfänger, so-called. So there was no way of hearing the news that wasn't Nazi news. Lecturers, 10% of lecturers in higher education were dismissed, if they were socialists or Jewish people, whatever it was, and the rest of them had to join the Nazi Lecturers Association, sign a declaration in support of Hitler. In fact, at the bottom there you have a picture, it's 1938 in Vienna, of lecturers being forbidden entry into the University of Vienna, maybe because they're Jewish, maybe because they're socialists. But the intention was to control the minds of the German public. And you have to say, to some extent, it was a successful policy. Hitler also bullied the judiciary. Now, the German legal system is very different from the American one. But it was very important for the Nazis not to be seen to be breaking the law. So the result was that they would bully the judiciary so that it wouldn't oppose them. In October 33, they set up the pro-Nazi German Lawyers Front and quickly had 100,000 members, as you can see there, giving the Nazi salute. From 1934, they set up what's called the People's Court in Berlin, which meant to say that if they couldn't get what they wanted in the normal legal system, they would get it in their own People's Court. And there you have a picture of the People's Court, again with the swastikas and the Nazi salutes. From 1936, in fact, all German judges had to wear the eagle and the swastika of the Nazi party. Perhaps we can't sum it up any better than Telford Taylor, who was the US prosecutor at Nuremberg, who very famously said that, and you can see the quote there, this is from the Nuremberg trials after the Second World War. He said, leaders of the German judicial system consciously and deliberately suppressed the law, engaged in an unholy masquerade of brutish tyranny disguised as justice, and converted the German judicial system to an engine of despotism, conquest, pillage, and slaughter. And you have to say that recent historians have pretty much upheld Telford Taylor's verdict. Marie, thoughts from you, maybe?
Yes. So we've seen Trump start to dismantle government in a historically unprecedented way here in the United States, following this Project 2025 plan, and even going beyond it in some respects. And he, starting in his first term, there was a packing of the Supreme Court. He's been assisted in this by Leonardo Leo, a right-wing Catholic. And they're also beginning to target universities. 2 more were announced today, Cornell and, at any rate, two more universities. So it's really unprecedented, and indeed a time that hopefully we'll be taking these lessons from other eras, definitely targeting political opponents as well, whether those are law firms or the corporate media.
Thanks, Marie. So if you thought all that was easy, now we get to the difficult part. There were in Nazi Germany very few Nazis. There were very few Nazi officials. I think we imagine that people conformed to the Nazi regime because they were made to. Well, I'm afraid historians have discovered that simply isn't true. For example, in Würzburg, there were 1 million inhabitants. There were 28 Gestapo officers. There were very few Gestapo police. There were very few SS. There were very few of these guys. people cooperated with the Nazis not because they wanted to, but because they chose to. Now, that's not because they were convinced that the Nazis were right about everything. Recent studies have shown that it was because they believed it was simply safer to do what they thought the Nazis wanted. It was, if you like, a kind of Faustian bargain. I'll do what you want if you leave me alone. Companies got rid of their Jewish employees before the government even made it compulsory. Clerks and town council, we now discover, were confiscating Jewish property. Insurance companies were refusing to pay out when Jewish companies were damaged, for example, by Nazi thugs. The fact was that the Nazi authorities simply lacked the manpower to hunt any opposition down, but the public betrayed any opposition and simply denounced it to the Nazi authorities. Between 50 and 80% of all Gestapo cases came from public denunciations. And we now know, having looked into them, that many of those denunciations were malicious. They were just settling local scores. In fact, so many German people denounced their neighbors that in the end, the SS had to stop people denouncing anybody else. They started prosecuting people for denouncing their neighbors because there were just too many of them. They were overwhelmed. A very striking book has come out this year, written by German Marie Wilwerding, who since the 1970s has lived in the village in New York. She grew up in a little town called Salmünster, just outside Frankfurt, a town of less than 2,000 people in the 1930s. She's gone back to Salmünster and has talked to the people there about what happened in the 1930s. Perhaps I can just quote a little paragraph. She says, "By 1937, my hometown's residents had ousted their friends and neighbours, mostly because they were Jewish, inflicting severe suffering on those with whom they had grown up and shared so many wonderful exchanges and friendships, many departing with extreme sadness and in tears. And this purge unfolded without any paramilitary intervention or outside physical force. The people of Salmünster simply threw out their Jewish neighbours and socialist neighbours or whatever because they thought that that way the Nazis would leave them alone." And Boers said many other towns in the neighbouring area did exactly the same. You have to say that many German companies also later collaborated quite willingly in making the Holocaust possible. The train companies, very famously, IG Farben, the big pharma company which developed Zyklon B, the gas that killed the Jewish people, and they went on improving this gas to make it kill people better. Another was De Homag, which made the business data machines that enabled this whole incredibly complicated thing of taking people and putting them in camps and killing some and so on. It made it possible. The tattoo that we often see on people's forearms, tattooed in the concentration, the extermination camp inmates, is thought to be, and I think there's good evidence, that it was originally a punch card number from De Homag data machines. Well, so there you are. They've got a picture there of Hitler sitting down with various businessmen, and on his left, on our right there in the picture, the man sitting next to him is in fact the owner of De Homag. And what is pretty chilling is that he was an American. His name was Thomas Watson, and he was the founding CEO of IBM. De Homag was the IBM subsidiary in Germany. To what extent Watson and IBM knew what was going on, that their machines were being used to enable the Holocaust, is very controversial. We shall probably never know the truth because I think it was in 2000, IBM simply paid out a very large amount of money to stop all the court cases that were being brought against them by survivors. And so we'll never really know the truth. But those tattooed numbers were certainly De Homag numbers and maybe IBM numbers. These were companies that backed the Nazis. They didn't have to, they backed them anyway. They were, of course, making money from it. Well, one of the most difficult cases of this Faustian collaboration with Hitler has to be the Catholic Church. Now, 40% of Germans were Catholic. There are different figures about that, but certainly in places like Bavaria, for example, where Nazism originated, they were a majority. So this was a key constituency. The Vatican had made desultory attempts to talk to the German governments in the 1920s, but it took only 4 months of Hitler's reign before they made a deal with him, the Concordat of July 1933, signed by Pius XI. And there you can see the Vatican Secretary of State, Cardinal Eugenio Pacelli, who negotiated the deal arriving in Germany. The deal was that the Catholic Church would be silent on Hitler's brutal policies, and he would protect the property and privileges of the church by return. You have to say that that is a Faustian bargain. Well, Hitler didn't keep his side of the bargain. He began charging the Catholic Church. He found cases of, among the religious and clergy, cases of immorality and corruption. We might perhaps say that that wouldn't be all that difficult to do. Some, we should say, and it's only fair to say, now some Catholics led a very brave resistance to Hitler, notably the Bishop of Münster, now the Blessed Clemens von Galen, who is, you can see there in the picture, you wouldn't want to mess with him. And he and Cardinal Michael von Faulhaber of Munich led a very brave resistance against the Nazis, and they persuaded the Vatican to draw up an anti-Nazi papal encyclical in 1937, protesting at what they saw as the persecution of the Catholic Church. However, in March 1939, Cardinal Pacelli was elected as Pius XII. Recently released documents show that within weeks of the outbreak of war, Pius XII began secret negotiations with Hitler. His intention was to restore Catholic privileges in Germany in return for continued silence on the atrocities of Hitler's war, and particularly atrocities against the Jews. His priority, Pius XII's priority, was to fight Soviet Marxism, and in order to do that, he would let basically Hitler do whatever he chose to do. Late 1941, social worker Dr. Margarete Sommer passed to the German bishop very grisly, very accurate details of what the Nazi Sonderkommando were up to in Poland, lining Jewish people up on open graves and shooting them and murdering them in cold blood. The next year, 1942, an SS officer gave the Catholic bishops grim and accurate facts about mass extermination in the Belzec death camps. There can be absolutely no doubt whatever that the German Catholic bishops knew all about the fact of the Holocaust, and I'm afraid to say they did absolutely nothing at all. So if you want to find a case of voluntary cooperation with the Nazis, voluntary collaboration, I'm afraid to say that the Catholic Church gives a pretty grim example. And maybe it's worth here saying that today we should commemorate the life and work and death of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who was killed by the Nazis exactly 80 years ago today. It's the anniversary. Bonhoeffer, of course, with Martin Niemöller, set up the professional church, an attempt amongst Protestants to set up a church that would resist the Nazis. Bonhoeffer and his brother Klaus worked with the resistance against Hitler, tried on a couple of occasions to assassinate Hitler, and they both ended up in Flossenburg camp. Dietrich was killed 80 years ago today, and his brother a few weeks later. Bonhoeffer once wrote to his sister-in-law, Klaus's wife, a very famous letter to Emmy. He said, "If I sit next to a madman as he drives a car into a group of innocent bystanders, I can't, as a Christian, simply wait for the catastrophe, then comfort the wounded and bury the dead. I must try to wrestle the steering wheel out of the hands of the driver." Well, it's a pretty good counterexample, I think. Okay, let me just finally turn the mirror around, if I may, and just look at what was going on from the American side in the 1930s. Because you see, it's very difficult to avoid the conclusion that it was American businesses that got Hitler into power and kept him there and enabled him to fight the Second World War. The point is that from the First World War, US economic policy was to try and beggar everybody else in the benefit of the American economy. You may recognize that idea. They would try to dominate world markets, full-blown economic nationalism. The result was that a few people were rich, roaring 20s, a few people were made rich. But by beggaring everybody else's economy, of course, all that happens is that it brought about world financial crash in 1929, which in the end brought down Wall Street in October of 1929, the worst crash in history, leading to 10 years of Great Depression. One of the results was, as we've seen, the collapse of the German economy and the coming to power of Adolf Hitler. Now, throughout the 1920s and into the 1930s, American businesses had exploited German economic weakness to buy up German companies. Ford, General Motors, Standard Oil of New Jersey, that's now Exxon or Esso if you're in Britain, IBM, AEG, ITT, they were all at it. And it was these these companies, along with financiers and British banks, let it be said, with US and British government backing, that shut their eyes to reality, enabled the Nazis to defy Germany's extremely economic weak position and arm and relaunch and launch a Second World War of extreme aggression. Some businesses, in fact, actually openly said they preferred doing business in Nazi Germany than in democratic USA. So there's a brochure from the war. It says Kamerad truck. It's for Ford trucks made for the German army. The fact was that Ford and General Motors made most of the vehicles that the German army used during the war. General Motors, for example, made 24,000 army trucks just in 1939. Ford and General Motors were using slave labor sponsored by the Nazis to produce military vehicles. These were the vehicles that invaded Belgium, Netherlands, France, Norway, Denmark. It was American vehicles, and they were also running on American fuel, which was indeed also fueling the bombers that were bombing London. There is a map from 1940. This is Standard Oil of New Jersey, Esso, Exxon, showing to the public very proudly how they're still managing to get oil past the British blockade and into Germany so that they could put it into German bombers and bomb London. One company in Philadelphia sent so many ball bearings to the German forces during the war, they managed to sort of smuggle them through South America and through Spain and so on, that the American army ended up being short of ball bearings because they were all being sent. This is why the Americans were at war with Germany. They were all being sent to the German army. Now, it's a complicated story, and lots of American companies would try to tell you they simply couldn't get out of Nazi Germany and they didn't know what was going on. Well, we could go into the details of this. Plenty of companies did find ways to get out of Nazi Germany. Those who stayed there chose to stay. What we know for sure is that because there was a report written in 1934, that American businesses and diplomats were absolutely clear that if they pulled out, Hitler would be brought down within days. Rearmament wouldn't be possible. The Second World War would never have happened. But they chose to stay there because they were making money out of it. And British banks too. What this tells you is, frankly, that the last people you should ever have running your politics, and we've suffered from this in Britain too, is business. They are historically the most immoral participant in public affairs. They simply can't be trusted to run countries in anyone's interest except their own. And I'm afraid that is a very sad verdict from history. If you should want to find any more out about that, it's a very complicated subject. Try the History Cafe podcast series, Trading with the Nazis. You can find it on our website. And if you look on or any other podcast platform, and if you look on our website, you will also find a very extensive bibliography of academic work, which backs all these things up, things we've been talking about here. But let me then stop there and let Marie give a response to all these shocking things.
Yes, it's so shocking, Jon. Thank you for sharing Hildegard and I had when we were in school and not hearing about so much of this. We do have some important differences to work with. You know, fortunately, our state and local governments are still relatively strong in the U.S., and it's clear from your presentation, even more so that we need to keep those strong, and also in both Germany and in here, both Trump and Hitler were able to build on a politics of resentment, and if we can turn that on its head, kind of like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was talking about, by getting the essentials for all to thrive, that seems like it would be a way forward. Also, keeping in mind our social justice tradition, the universal destination of goods, that wealth belongs first to the sustenance of all. Of course, we're very interested in hearing from others on this call too about their ideas for what to do next. The the information that you share is almost I don't know, too shocking to respond to quickly. I mean, it's fruit for all of us to think about for a while and keep our eyes open, because our Catholic leaders here at the U.S. CCB and in New York City, for example, really delivered the Catholic vote in a lot of ways. So instead of being that social justice swing vote, at any rate, that we definitely need to take a closer look at all of this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So really back to you.
I think there are so many examples that we could all share. Let's open this up to all of you now, just to share any comments or questions
Do we have?
that you have.
I'm sorry. Do we have John? Slide the one for Hildegard?
We do. So when we come to Hildegard, yeah, we can have a slide. We can put that up too. Yeah.
Why don't we do Hildegard first before we open up?
Yeah. Okay. No problem at all. Was it that?
Okay. You ready?
Yes. Well, I was born in 1939, just 2 months after the war started, and the war was over in 1945. So I got a sense of there was something wrong. And I remember that when I was 4 and before the war was over, saying, he's a Nazi. Or did you hear what she said, anyways, then we returned to Cologne, where I was born, and that was at the time that in Germany, the Catholics had Catholic schools, Protestants, the Lutherans had the Lutheran school, and from the time that I was 5.5 to 6, until I was 16, I never heard anything from that there had been schools.
So nothing about the Holocaust.
Never. I had no idea. Settled in the United States, I learned awfully wrong, but it wasn't Roman Catholic schools in Cologne, Archdiocese of Cologne. They had nothing to teach us children that something that we had a past like we did. And that's very surprising for me, because today, even though and individuals like Cardinals, they do speak up, but we
You're saying to everyone, to all faith, to people of faith, in conscience, to stand up.
Right.
The time is now.
The time is now. Sister Chittister.
Yes.
And my suggestion would be that all people of faith come together and
That's an important
teach
statement that
and
you're making,
embrace
Hildegard.
Our
All
social,
people of
Catholic
faith come together.
social
That's so
teaching,
important.
but also just
Oh, we've lost them. They've gone mute.
yeah.
thank you.
Hildegard, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Your experience as a young child in school in Germany is reminiscent for me of my growing up in the South and never hearing anything about the South's role in the Civil War. I never knew anything about that in school. So I fully understand your not understanding and not being told anything during your time.
Mm.
Jon, let's pull your slide now and come back to all of you. I think there's so many comparisons that are going through our mind right now. Just as Hitler pulled out of the League of Nations, so we in our
Today,
country pulled out of NATO. There's so many comparisons. Let's open it up now, just for any of you who have comments.
Really look at our past and the
So there's a little button
apologize.
under your reaction button down below. And if you would like to raise your hand or make a comment or a statement, please do so.
Internet signal's very weak right now, so don't wait for us.
Thank you. Barry, let's begin with you.
Well, thank you. I'm going to just focus on one thing that the Trump administration has done already and is continuing to do. Let me just say that on Monday, February 3rd, the administration was exactly 2 weeks old when Elon Musk announced on his X platform that he had spent the weekend feeding the USAID program into the wood chipper. The Vatican immediately responded by saying that as a result of the ruthless and reckless policies of the Trump administration, millions of people will die. The New York Times, a few weeks later on March 26th, had this headline: U.S. to end vaccine funds for poor countries. The Trump administration has terminated financial support for GAVI, the Vaccine Alliance, the organization that has helped purchase critical vaccines for children in developing countries, saving millions of lives over the past quarter century. Hitler turned on the gas valve and killed 8 million people. These people are turning off the valve of aid to developing nations, to the poorest people on the world, in the earth. I think that Trump and Elon are actually trying to top the 8 million people mark. And I think as Christians, we should be outraged by that, absolutely, and do everything we can to stop it. Thank you.
Someone just sent a text over about being a USAID employee. Would you speak up and just comment vocally to everyone?
Yes. Hello. Can you see me?
Yes, we hear you fine.
Yeah. So this is very dear to me, and what Barry just said, I can testify. I work for USAID, and on that February Monday the 3rd, we were kicked out of the system at 4:30 p.m. with no notification, nothing. And that was a weekend that Elon Musk had attempted to get information, classified information from USAID on a Saturday night, which is not regular business hours, right? And it's been hell for us. We've been terminated twice, then restated by a court order. Now we're gonna be, we are laid off, reduction in force as of July 1st, and other group as of September 2nd to finalize dismantling the organization and sending it to State Department. But we are everyone fired. They're gonna keep only 15 people just for regulations. And they had ended all the programs as of probably a month ago. 83% of the programs were already finalized, and the funding was frozen, so we couldn't do anything. Like since February, as Barry was saying, it's been very tragic for everyone. It's very traumatic for everyone. We're like, I'm a civil servant, probationary period. I've been there for 2.5 years, previously as a contractor. There are career diplomats who have all their lives have been preparing for this career, and now they're suddenly removed from the agency, and everything is done unconstitutionally, unfortunately. Over. You're on mute, Renee.
Paul, let's go to you next.
Yes. Cardinal Michael Faulhaber had a young priest in the diocese when he wrote a document, Mit brennender Sorge. And Johann Baptist Neuhäusler was taking this document to Rome for the Pope, and he was arrested by the Gestapo. He spent time in Sachsenhausen and in Dachau. In the 50s, the Americans released him from Dachau, and in the 50s, he was ordained a bishop. And in 1968, he ordained me a deacon in Munich. And when he ordained me, he told me, I am now a Catholic priest of 56 years. But when he ordained me in Munich, he said to me, Paul, this ordination means one thing and one thing only. Whenever the icon of God, the human person, is defiled, you with your life, you must say no.
Paul, who was this person? Can you tell us the name? And if he...
Johann Baptist Neuhäusler. Neuhausler, Johann Baptist Neuhäusler. He is buried, and his grave is in Dachau, on the edge of the concentration camp. And whenever I go to Germany, because I worked for justice in Rome for my Redemptorist congregation for 7 years, and obviously I was ordained because I studied in Munich way back from 65 to 69. And so every time I go, I take the S-Bahn from Munich out to Dachau, and I spend some time at his tomb, and we communicate with each other, so as it were.
So helpful, Paul. Thank you for sharing that. All right, S.J. Harrow, let's go to you next.
Hello, everyone. My name is Steve Harrow. I'm calling in from De Pere, Wisconsin of the United States. There's another dimension which I would like to bring up about the operations of the Trump administration. I'm a Catholic religious. I'm also a librarian and archivist. So there is a list of like nearly 300 books which have been banned by the Trump administration from public libraries, publicly funded school libraries. And just this week, you might have heard that the Secretary of Defense has taken this list and banned these books from the library at the Naval Academy. And amongst the authors are Maya Angelou, many theologians, including a Catholic priest by the name of Brian Massengale, who teaches at Fordham University. Brian happens to be Black, and he has been a consultant to the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops on items related to racism and the church. And his book, Racial Justice in the Catholic Church, which was published in 2010, is on this banned list. This is a priest in good standing who has served as a consultant to the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. And his book is being banned in publicly funded libraries, and now the Naval Academy Library. And so to the point of like, where is the magisterium in opposing the work of the Trump administration? A Catholic priest in good standing who has been a consultant to the United States Conference of Catholic Books, Catholic Conference. His work is being banned from public libraries in the United States, publicly funded libraries in the United States, now including the Naval Academy Library. So they, I mean, we know that the administration has banned the purchase of newspapers, such as the New York Times, by the Defense Department and other military agencies. But now the books of Catholic theologians, including Brian Massengale, have been banned from academic libraries of at least one military installation. I find this appalling. And, you know, to the point of like, where is the magisterium stepping up? You know, now we have a Catholic priest in good standing who has been a consultant to the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. His work is being banned in the Naval Academy Library and other public libraries and such.
You're muted, Rini. Rini's muted.
Along with that, we also see public media like NPR in serious jeopardy of being shut down. So along with banning certain books, we're seeing the media that speaks out truth to power is being in jeopardy at this moment. John, back to you.
Can I just respond to what's just been said? I mean, people have this famous idea in their head that the Germans burned books. In fact, it only occurred on one occasion. It occurred in Berlin and several other places in May 1933, so far as we know. Maybe others will correct me on this, but as I understand it, only occurred then. And it occurred then because Goebbels, Joseph Goebbels, who was the Gauleiter, he was the local administrator of Berlin, was a complete out-and-out radical. He was even more Nazi than Hitler was. And he tried to start burning books written by Jewish authors, anybody who he thought was a socialist and so on. The other Nazis were so shocked by this that they forbade it ever to happen again. And so far as we know, those books that were burnt on that occasion, you know, books by Einstein and these kind of things, actually continue to be available. Probably difficult to get hold of, but continue to be available within Nazi Germany. So what Trump is doing is actually a whole stage worse than what the Nazis did.
It's frightening. Any other comments, anyone at all, or question, anything that you'd like to raise, or parallels that you're seeing yourself? Claire, let's go to you next. And let's unmute you to begin with.
Hello, everyone. I listened to this with great fear, to be honest. Human Rights Watch, which is a respectable human rights organization around the world, wrote within hours of returning to power Monday, this was on the 23rd of January, United States President Donald Trump issued a stunningly broad executive order that seeks to dismantle crucial protections for transgender people and denies the validity of gender identity itself. I'm a transgender academic. I'm a senior fellow at Margaret Beaufort Institute of Theology in Cambridge. I've spent 5 years at Margaret Beaufort researching transgender experiences of children in school. It went to a publisher last year, and after 7 months, and sending it out for peer review, they inexplicably, in my mind, refused to publish the book. And I feel this was in March, so we're talking 2 months after Trump's executive order. So I'm beginning to think that it won't be published because of Donald Trump in the USA, and research evidence suggests that what happens in the United States today will be happening in the UK tomorrow. Sorry, somebody interrupted me.
Thank you, Claire. Any other question or comment or observation?
Well, I would like to say that, and this, I mean, I've been concerned, we've all been concerned about Trump, but it has been very helpful to me, John, your use of the term Faustian bargain, and the subtlety of it in some ways. German bishops kind of sort of went along to get along, but more importantly, in my mind, the German people, German Catholics in particular, sort of let themselves, and I love the term, I find it very helpful, this Faustian bargain term that you used, and it seems really applicable here in the United States.
And comparably, Clyde, the fact that even so many public publications were afraid to speak up. Remember when the Washington Post was about to put out a preference for the candidates and then withdrew, actually afraid. So many of them seem to be fearful and operating from fear rather than the courage to speak their mind. That's frightening.
Well, that was that Washington Post story that gets back to the owner of the Post. What's his name? Jeff Bezos. So it wasn't just fearful on the part of the editors. I think they were, Bezos had a role in that. Money.
Frank, let's go to you next.
Thanks, Rennie. What I wanted to do was, in a sense, pivot the discussion now towards what can be done. We've had a very, very full analysis by John and others, setting out, if you like, the problems. I have the advantage of being on the right side of the Atlantic Ocean at the moment, but it would be interesting for the discussion now to look at other things that can be done in terms of you have midterm elections in what, 18 months' time? To what extent can we look towards parishes encouraging engagement in political action, for example, and so on?
Barry.
Yeah, I'd like to respond to that. Last Saturday was a national day of protests here in the United States, and I think they may have even taken place in other parts of the world. And there were, of course, the big ones in Washington and other major cities. But I went one to one. I'm in Bridgeport, Connecticut. I went one like 10 miles down the road in Westport, Connecticut, and there probably were 2,000 people there. And they were all over this area of this part of Connecticut. There were hundreds of them all over the country. And this was the first day of national protest. I think you're going to see a lot more of them, and they're going to get bigger and bigger. Now, I'm also a member of the Social Justice Committee of my parish. And we're a rather progressive parish. We have Jesuits who are our sacramental ministers. We have a woman who is our pastoral life coordinator, equivalent to the pastor. But the sacramental ministers are Jesuits, and they often preach on social justice issues. And we're trying to do whatever we can as a social justice committee to get people first of all, aware of what's going on. The thing I talked about before about the USAID cuts, for example, make them aware, and then hopefully elicit an attitude of compassion. And then thirdly, and more important, the most important, you might say, is take action. So showing up on that picket line last Saturday was something a number of us did. And more of that has to happen. You know, letters and emails and going to town halls run by congressmen, all of those things are very important. And we have to pressure the church too. We have to pressure our own bishops to stand up to it and be loud and forceful in what they say. Bishop Buddy, Marion Buddy from the Episcopal Diocese of Washington, D.C., is the bishop I respect most right now. I'm hopeful for Cardinal McElroy now that he's in Washington, but the bishop in the United States that I admire most of all is the Episcopal Bishop of Washington, who on the day after the inauguration spoke truth to power from her pulpit.
And as we reached out to her, she could not be with us this morning physically, but she did send her support and best wishes, that encouraging us to speak out, to not stop speaking out, and to get our message out there. We've got to stand up for social justice. Ali, let's go to you next.
When we're talking about what to do, and maybe you've already talked about it, I know I came in a little late. There's an app on your phone. It's called 5 Calls. And I don't know if you're familiar with it. You can just Google 5 Calls, download it, put in your zip code. It will list your representatives and senators. It will list the specific bills that are going to be in Congress that day or within that week. And you get their phone number, and then you can email them or call them and tell them specifically about your view on specific bills. And so prior to that, I was calling and letting them know about various things. But this is a very surgical app. So you can put it in, you can look at, like for today, the notice I got was demand that Congress stop Trump's tariffs and reclaim trade authority. And it lists my senators and representatives who I have to call with their phone numbers. And so I can call them and tell them about that specific thing that they're going to be voting on. And then
Holly, would you put that address in the chat so that everybody can see it and copy it? We'd really appreciate it.
Yes.
Along those lines, another suggestion that we have is that with Clyde's help, we will transpose this recording today to YouTube, so we will have it permanent. We will send it out to all of you through the newsletter. So if you're not on our newsletter list, be sure to put your email address in the newsletter so we can get you included. But you will all have a recording of today's event in your own possession. And we encourage you to just have it, to perhaps find people in your own family or among your circle of friends who would be open and willing to at least just listen and offer to share this with them. Be open, be respectful, do not be pushy. There's no value in that, but just share this video of today's call with anyone who would be open to listening. And we'll put that in all of your hands immediately after, as soon as we have it transposed to YouTube, we'll send it out. I think another thing that will be helpful by way of what can we do, all of you outside the United States, contact your American friends who have the power to vote in 2026. Contact them. Let them know what you're seeing, what you're fearful of, and share with them your own heartfelt feelings. I think that would be helpful. The power is in the hands of the vote of the American people. So that's one thing that everyone here can do. Other
Me, I
suggestions?
would add one thing. It's kind of something that has been of interest to me for a while. I've been thinking about it for a while. But as we think of things that we can do, we're chronically in the mode of thinking what I can do personally. And somehow or other, we need to figure out a way that we can do something collectively. We have relied upon our, governmental, local, state, national governments, to do that. But I think we need something more and a framework which seems to me might work for. I mean, if we can get together to do something like it, it's very, very simple. But it's to step back from what's going on and view it as a stress test upon democracy. And if we were to look at the situation as an opportunity to do a stress test. I mean, if any organization were to look at themselves and put themselves through a stress test, it takes a little planning. You have to look at the situation and see what are our strengths and weaknesses, and how would we stress the system. And I think if you look at what's actually happening, Donald Trump and his minions are putting the United States and our democracy through a stress test. And if we looked at it in that fashion, so that we could step back and observe what is happening, as against what we would predict might happen if we put ourselves in a stress test, I think that would give us some perspective. But it takes people to get together and to actually put together that kind of a plan.
Thank you, Clyde. Michael, let's go to you next.
Yes. So I'm just very briefly picking up on what somebody said, that people from outside of the United States maybe, can get together or do things in their own countries. So I'm calling from Toronto in Canada. So we were the first victims, in a sense, first targets of Trumpianism, together with Mexico and, of all places, Greenland. And Trump talked seriously about taking over Canada as the 51st state. That's gone. I think that's gone. But here in Canada, we've always felt the metaphor is sleeping with an elephant. So when the United States sort of moves over, we feel it, and we're feeling it very passionately, very painfully right now. So in Canada, where we are in a somewhat privileged position, we're in a very vulnerable position in terms of the United States, because our economies are 80% integrated. And so we are very vulnerable, but we're in a privileged position that we have our own set of values, our own social system, our health system, our educational system, and so on, which is very respectful of everybody. It's never perfect, but we are able to push back some. But then, with the elephant, when you've got to be careful, which part of the elephant you're pushing, because you might get trampled. And so, and we've got a new prime minister who is maybe making a difference. And in any case, whether in Canada is in this particular position, and in contrast to at least one of my friends, I sent my friend the link for this meeting, and his reaction, even though it was maybe with humor, was represent a certain sort of timidity, like people maybe would know what his political leanings were, and he would be maybe suffer the consequences. But I'm certainly supporting what's happening here, and Canada is certainly on the side of people here. I want to add one more personal thing. I was born maybe a month after Hildegard was. I was born on the first day of January 1940, so I grew up in the war a little bit, but I do remember clearly 1946, Christmas 1946. So the war is over, but we still had German prisoners of war in South Wales, where I lived. Christmas Day, they came to church, and the prisoners of war, and they were wearing POW uniforms, and obviously they're all men, and they stood behind the altar and sang Christmas carols in German. I will never forget it. But a key thing picking up on the first message tonight from the American legislator, and that is when I said something, and it was only about 5, said something about hating Hitler. My father said, "You cannot hate people. You cannot hate people." My father had been in the military all his life. He was in the military for 30-something years. My grandfather was in the military all his life. Obviously, they served in the First World War on the one hand, my father in the Second World War, but we were not allowed to hate. And my parents sent food packages to the families of the POWs who were still being held in South Wales in 1946. So, you know, it was for me a very important lesson, you know, the lesson of Jesus Christ. We must love our enemies as well as loving our friends and people who do nice things to us. So I'll just leave it at that. Thank you very much.
And AOC made that point so beautifully. Thank you for re-supporting it.
Carmen, can you hear me? Brenda, this is
Yes, Brenda.
Yeah, I've had my hand up. I would like to, I've been picketing for about the last 6 weeks. And what I've noticed, there's no sign labeled people of faith. It's not mentioned anywhere. Some of the signs are hysterically funny. Some are very serious. But the people of faith are not standing out at all. I've never seen a single sign, and I've been in, with groups of over 1,000. Okay, so what I would like to say is, I think get out there and picket, get your sign, but also perhaps merging congregations. We have our own parishes. There's also Protestant congregations. There's Jewish organizations. In some areas, lots of people of Islam. Some people of different faiths or no faiths. And, you know, go out together as people of faith. Because like lots of people think, or people of faith, they think maybe, well, they're just one particular denomination, or they're very conservative or something like that. If we could go out together, merging with different organizations, but continuing our presence as people of faith for everybody, and that we're all into this. This is a whole thing, all of us together. Thank you.
Thank you, Brenda. This is a call for ecumenical action in a time, if ever there was a time, to stand up for social justice. We have got to get Christians aware of what's happening, number one. So much of what Hildegard shared and what we've heard repeatedly is that at the end of the Nazi regime, so many Germans said, we didn't know. We just didn't know. Well, I'm afraid that we could end up with a 4-year term of Donald Trump and an irreplaceable, irreformable oligarchy. And Americans would be saying, we just didn't know. We had no idea. It all sounded so good at the time. Make America great again. So I think we have almost a moral responsibility to try to get back to the Americans who are just going along because they listen to the right news that supports the point of view that this is all good, all helpful, and try to reach out to them. So when we ask the question, what can I do? What I can do is to bring others together. What I can do is to try to organize little groups in my world and see if we can't at least find some way to speak out and make our voice heard. Jon, back to you.
I've just been reminded over and again as we've been talking and all these things that people have been suggesting and all this positive energy of something that Martin Niemöller wrote. It's a very, everybody will know it. Martin Niemöller set up the Confessional Church with Dietrich Bonhoeffer. And he was talking exactly about that thing where unless I do it, unless I start doing it, nothing will happen. Unless we stand up for each other, nothing will happen. You will all know the poem. It's worth reminding ourselves. He says, first they came for the communists, and I didn't speak out because I wasn't a communist. And then they came for the socialists, and I didn't speak out because I wasn't a socialist. And then they came for the trade unionists, and I didn't speak out because I wasn't a trade unionist. And then they came for the Jews, and I didn't speak out because I was not a Jew. And then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak out for me. It's eloquent stuff, I think, and it keeps coming back to me. Is it's up to all of us to stand up for each other. It begins with us joining with other people, as Brenda so helpfully said. Denominations, who care? Let's do this together. I think that's right, and that applies to us in England. We're all kinds of terrible. We've been stopped from protesting. These terrible things are happening, and we've all got to try standing together. And certainly in the UK, we stand with you in the US. Absolutely, whole square.
John, thank you. Has anyone had kind of a thought, of something moving you in your heart that you want to share what you can do, what others might be able to do? We really need to think in terms of taking action. As Barry, as you pointed out, we can't just sit back and remain silent. Silence is complicity.
I would just like to add one thing. The first group I started with was 6 weeks ago. There were 50 people there, 50 people. Downtown city of maybe 50,000, okay? 7 weeks later, there was 1,800 people there. And this last Saturday, probably 2,008 people, 800 people. This one little spot in front of a Tesla dealership, 50 people and to say over 2,000 in 6 weeks. So even if you start out small, it grows.
That's how it always begins. Start out small. Any other thought?
Well, just to pick up on that point, we think of demonstrations as being in person. You get out on the street. But I think we can think about how we can hold demonstrations on Zoom.
Mm-hmm.
It gives people a place to go that, you probably get a lot more people if you have a place that is, big enough and they can just click in.
Can we expand on that idea of Zoom sharings? You are all welcome to use the CCRI Zoom room. If you need a place to hold it, just let me know and we'll schedule you in and keep that space open for you.
You just have to track the numbers because that's what people like to print. So I think it's tracking the numbers is important.
Hildegard or Marie, do you have a closing comment?
I think one lesson out of the whole thing to me seems to be that, we heard about themes of resentment and greed. And I think it's so important for us to understand the real life experiences underlying some of the resentment and pressure on people, communities, families in the United States. And a lot of it comes from, very low wages, minimum wage around, $7 something per hour, lack of health care. About half of bankruptcies in the US are from lack of medical care. But if we can keep front and center or put it back at front and center, to have the ability of all to thrive, for all to have what they need. This is really a missing piece And we're, we don't hear about it so much at church anymore, but I think there is an opportunity to come together and to defend these interests of the working class and the 99% versus the small fraction of 1% that our society and government are oriented to the benefit of now.
And thank you.
Yeah,
Hildegard.
I would like to add that this 1% needs to be met with. We need to try to move them into their heart space, not into their greed space. And ask someone who has billions like Musk or others, why are you here on Earth? Were you sent? To eliminate suffering or to add to it? And don't stop talking to them. Like if Zuckerberg, by the way, Zuckerberg is a German word, so he must be somehow be from Germany. If he is able with his billions to feed the whole world, what a beautiful, beautiful place the world would be when everybody is taken care of through their own efforts and through the efforts of all of us.
Thank you.
Beautiful closing comments, Hildegard. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And so many of us have such admiration for Bishop Buddy, who spoke out during the inaugural prayer service. I can't help but notice in contrast that Cardinal Dolan was also speaking at the inaugural prayer service. And he was so in admiration of President Trump, so proud to call him his friend. And I think it might serve some purpose if some of us wrote to Cardinal Dolan and let him know that there are values that Jesus would hold if he were on this earth with us today, that Trump would violate so many of those principles. And ask Cardinal Dolan, if you're such a friend, speak to him. Have the courage of your Christian upbringing, of your Christian heart and soul, to let him know where he is not behaving, what activities of his are not helping. So think about all the things that we can do. There are so many possibilities.
Rini, maybe you can share Cardinal Dolan's email along with the YouTube when you send that.
Yes.
All right. We will do that. And perhaps Bishop Buddy's as well.
Sure. Yes, to thank
Right?
her.
We'll share both of them to thank her and continue to thank her. Faithful America has been wonderful at that. And I do want to thank all of the associates who joined us for sponsoring today's event. We have the Austrian, German, and U.S. Catholic Priests Associations who have all sponsored this event. Faithful America has sponsored this event. Georgetown University worked very hard in the background to help bring Bishop Buddy in, and we're grateful to their center at Georgetown. So we're thankful to everyone. And I guess on this note, if there are no further comments.
I have a comment. Sorry to
Please.
interrupt at the end here. Could you also send the email for Bishop Barron? When the Congress when Trump met with all the Congress, he was there and in support of this whole thing too. So maybe it can go to both at the same time.
All right.
Bishop Barron in Winona, Rochester Diocese.
All right. Any other person that you'd like to have included on that?
Thank you, what you're doing.
Can I just say one thing, Renee?
Yes, Barry.
I have an item of good news. Cardinal Dolan turned 75 on February 6th. He was required to submit his letter of resignation that day. I sent him a letter and I said, I hope the Pope accepts it on February 7th. The Pope has not accepted it yet because he's obviously been distracted recently, but I'm hopeful that he will accept it soon and that we'll get a new Archbishop of New York who, like Pope Francis, smells like the sheep.
Thank you, Baron. And now let's close by praying out loud and together in gratitude for what we have shared and experienced today. So all together and out loud, Creator God,
Creator God, we thank you for the
encounter with one another today.
today.
We
know
two
that
or
where
three
two or three are gathered,
you are in our midst. Thank you for being with us
and for the
and for
courage
the courage to speak boldly
boldly
with passion
and with humility,
with open hearts.
with open hearts.
We
We
ask
ask
you
you
to continue to walk with us
with us
as we
as
discover
we discover the pathway
for the future
you
are calling us to.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you, everyone. What a beautiful, beautiful presentation. John, Hildegard, Marie, we're so grateful for all that you all shared from your heart and soul today. I think that we'll be able to use it again and again. When you receive this recording, you'll have it in your own possession. Use it to the best of your ability to share it with people who need to hear it. If you have ideas and suggestions of ways to move forward, of what we can do together, please be in communication with us. info@catholicchurchreform.com. Let us know what you're thinking, what ideas you have. If you want to use our Zoom room for your own ability to gather a group together, you are all welcomed. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
There were about 80 people on our call today, and we're grateful to every one of you. Go out now and spread the good news.
Will do.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you. And come back for April the 23rd for Margaret, Mary and Max and many others.
And April 19th is another huge picketing day. April 19th, look where it is in your neighborhood.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
I'm sorry I was late today, but the timing put me 2 hours behind the British summertime, and I am in Malta.
Oh.
So
All right.
there
Joyce,
is
thank you. Our next follow-up on this series is April 23rd at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. It'll be posted, it is posted on our universal calendar, so put that on your calendar next, followed by May 7th and May 21st.
Thank you so much. I have them, but it's the GMT that puts me off, and it just suddenly I found that I was an hour late.
Oh.
You were on the question time, so.
All right, we'll be starting an hour earlier for the next session.
Fine, yes.
And Father Helmut Heuler from Schumer from Austria, Father Max Stetter from Germany, Margaret Mary, a theologian from the US who will be facilitating, Paul, who is on this call today, and others will be
Regina.
there. Regina will be
Franklin,
on the call
Catholic
to
Women's
share,
Council.
and all of that to share the German perspective of what happened. And again, to give us an opportunity to see how this relates to what's happening here, what they did and what we can do, what they failed to do, and what we need to step up and do. All of that will be available to us. Thank you all.
Thank
Till
you.
next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, God bless.
Bye, Kathleen. Alexandra.